everyone, today my group will be presenting our FYP project titled Can Physical Function Predict Falls Risk in Community Dwelling Older Adults? According to statistical data by the World Health Organization in 2007, more than one-third of the community dwelling older adults above 65 years old fall annually. This is a worrying sign as the proportion of Singaporeans aged 65 years and above will rise from 9.3% in 2012 to a staggering 18.4% in 2030. With the rise in the aging population, there may be an increase in the incidence of falls. Falls are associated with significant mortality and morbidity. About 5% of falls result in fracture, and up to 11% of them result in other severe injuries that require medical attention. Consequences of falls can also be social and psychological. Over 30% of older adults who have fallen fear falling again. Together with the loss of confidence, it can lead to activity restriction and social withdrawal. This can be a public health problem with substantial impact on healthcare expenditures. Hence, falls risks should be identified early using an assessment tool so that appropriate interventions can take place to reduce adverse health-related problems. According to Narayanan and colleagues in 2008, the Physiological Profile Assessment (PPA) is a gold standard measure for falls risk. It is also a validated predictor for falls. It can currently classify older adults into multiple fallers and non-multiple faller groups with an accuracy of 75%. The scores obtained from the data collected from each individual factor are standardized for age and gender. A more positive sex score value indicates a higher risk of falls. However, PPA requires specialized equipment, trained personnel, and license is needed to obtain the equipment. The data requires computer processing to compute a falls risk score, and it takes longer to carry out. Thus, it is not a cost and time-efficient assessment tool. A simple falls risk assessment tool, which is easy to administer, quick to carry out, and safe to implement, is needed. It must be easy to administer so that it can be conducted in the community by any healthcare professionals using simple equipment which are readily available. It must be quick to carry out because there will be a large pool of elderly which needs to be screened for falls risk. It must be safe to implement so as not to pose any danger to the elderly being assessed. With aging, there are changes to the musculoskeletal and somatosensory system that increases the likelihood of falling. A decrease in the physical function is linked with high falls risk. Stell and colleagues in 2007 reported that poor physical function, such as decreased leg extension strength, decreased walking speed, and poor balance increases the likelihood of falling. This is supported by another study in 2003 by Neil Reckoner, which states that decreased lower leg strength and lower muscle mass, slower 400-meter walk time, and poor balance are highly correlated to falling. A latest article in 2012 by Smee and colleagues states that physical function has 75% probability to be a true component for the models of falls risk. Physical function can be measured using short physical performance battery, which measures the relevant component of strength, gait speed, and balance. Not only is SPPB an appropriate tool for measuring physical function, it also fulfills the criteria of a simple assessment tool. It is easy to conduct and takes only 10 minutes to carry out. It is also safe to be used to screen community-dwelling older adults, as it is shown to be safe to measure functional status of acutely ill geriatric patients who have been hospitalized for serious medical conditions. It also allows early functional decline to be identified even before being detected by the individual doctors. SPPB is indeed a simple assessment tool. Even so, it remains unclear if SPPB can predict falls risk in older adults. The purpose of our study is to determine if physical function can predict falls risk in community-dwelling older adults. Here's the inclusion and exclusion criteria. Recruitment, screening, and assessment of physical performance and falls risk were done on the same day for each participant. A total of 79 participants were recruited. Information sheets were given to each participant so that they understand the purpose of our study. They were also required to sign an informed consent form and health questionnaires before commencing any of the tests. Blood pressure and heart rate were taken before each session. 8 participants were excluded, of which 3 participants had uncontrolled hypertension, 3 had cardiac instability, and 2 participants had history of falls within the past 6 months. 71 participants were included according to these inclusion criteria. Participants' falls risks were evaluated using PPA, while their physical performance were measured using SPPB. Participants were allowed to rest for approximately 2 minutes between each test to allow for maximum performance. None of the participants withdrew. At the end of the data collection, blood pressure and height were taken again to ensure that the participants were stable. The data collected from 71 participants were then analyzed. The short version of PPA consists of all these tests. It has moderate to high test-retest reliability. Also, it is reported to have high discriminant validity, as it can significantly differentiate between subjects who experience multiple falls and subjects who experience no falls or one fall only. SPPB measures the 3 components shown here. It showed good internal consistency, and the summary performance measure showed high test-retest reliability. It also has good concurrent validity when it is correlated with physical performance tests, PPT. Now I'll pass on the time to Grace to discuss the results, discussion, and conclusion to our project.
Thank you, Farhana. Moving on to the results of the study. To determine the relationship between SPPB and PPA, a Pearson's correlation was done between the cumulative score of SPPB and PPA. As shown on this diagram, the y-axis shows the range of the PPA Z-score. The more positive the Z-score of the PPA, the higher the false risk, while the y-axis illustrates the score for the SPPB, which ranges from 0 to 12. The lower the score of the SPPB, the lower the physical function. A negative correlation was found between SPPB and PPA. The relationship was strong, with an R value of negative 0.611, and it was also significant with a P value of less than 0.001. This suggests that the lower the physical function, the higher the false risk. Next, we wanted to investigate the effect of our confounding variables on PPA. In our study, there were 2 recorded confounding variables, age and gender. However, only age was chosen as there was an unequal gender distribution within our sample. A simple linear regression was done for age and PPA. As shown on this diagram, with increasing age, there was an increase in the Z-score of the PPA, showing a positive linear relationship. Age was found to be significant in predicting falls with a beta coefficient of 0.37. This implies that for every 1 unit increase in age, there will be a 0.37 increase in the PPA Z-score. The older the age, the higher the false risk. The results are in line with Tinerty and colleagues' 1995 findings, in which they found that age is indeed a demographic risk factor of falls. As mentioned earlier, the physical performance test in SPPB, the 5 continuous chair stands, the progressive test of standing balance, and the walk test are measures of physical function such as lower limb strength, balance, and gait speed. Many studies have found to support that the decrease in strength, balance, and gait speed can lead to an increase in falls risk as measured by the PPA. To find out if SPPB can be used to predict falls risk, a multiple linear regression is done between the components of SPPB and PPA with age added as a control. Our results showed that the progressive test of standing balance were found to be the only one significant in predicting the risk of falls. The diagram above illustrates a relationship between the progressive test of standing balance and PPA. The graph shows a negative linear relationship between the progressive test of standing balance and the PPA. The beta coefficient was negative 0.51. This means that for every 1 unit change in the balance component of the SPPB, there's a negative 0.51 change in the PPA Z-score. Results indicate that the progressive test of standing balance is predictive of PPA, therefore false risk. Interestingly, when age was added as a control into the multiple linear regression when between PPA and SPPB, it was found to be non-significant in predicting false risk. This suggests that when using SPPB, age is not a factor influencing the false risk, and SPPB would be a good objective measure of false risk. Moving on to the discussion, to the best of our knowledge, this is the first study to have found that physical function SPPB is associated with false risk PPA. In a research article done by Smee and colleagues 2012, looking into the full screen and the continuous scale physical functional performance 10 tests, they found that there's a 75% probability that physical function is a true component of the model for false risk. This is in line with our study where a strong significant negative correlation was found between physical function and false risk, suggesting that SPPB is a good false risk assessment tool. Next, in the investigation of the components of SPPB and their predictability on false risk, with age added as a control, our study was the first of its kind to find that age is independent of false risk when SPPB is used. The balance component in SPVB is found to be a good predictor of risk of falls. In the same study done by Smee and colleagues in 2012, comparing the relationship between the fall screen and the continuous scale physical functional performance 10 test, the 4 components of physical function which were found to have a significant association to falls risk include balance, muscle endurance, upper limb and lower limb strength. Out of the 4 components, the balance and the endurance component were found to have the strongest association. This supports our findings of the study where the balance component of SPVB is a predictor of falls. Furthermore, our findings concur with Gant and colleagues 2007, which found that impaired balance is a strong predictor of falls risk. As the progressive test of standing balance in SPVB is predictive of falls risk, it can be used as a determinant for the rest of the SPVB to be carried out. Intervention targeting balance should be the key focus of the falls prevention. Some of the limitations faced in this study include the sample not being an accurate representation of our population. There might be a selection bias as participants were only recruited from 2 different centers. This was due to complicated procedures to obtain permission to carry out exercise testing. However, efforts were made to obtain a sample size of a wide range of ages. The distribution of the sample ranges from 65 to 91 years with a mean age of 74.6 years. The next limitation will be a restriction of range of the SPVB score. Although the range of the SPVB score collected in this study were from 3 to 12, 51.4% of the older adults in our samples scored 10 to 12 on the SPVB, falling into the high physical function component. As the result, SPVB had a significant ceiling effect. Future studies can look into recruiting a larger sample size of a diverse population to increase the statistical and power of our study. In conclusion, this study is the first of its kind. As a whole, SPVB can be used by healthcare professionals as a simple falls risk assessment tool in the community as it's quick, easy and safe. Since progressive test of standing balance is the most predictive in SPVB, this test should be the determinant for the rest of the SPVB to be carried out. Balance training should be the key physical function component to be targeted at. Further studies can look into establishing a cut-off point for SPVB to determine between fallers and non-fallers. Thank you. We have come to the end of our presentation.